for me, music just has to communicate to people. It's got to make me feel something, you know. So, yeah, there's a lot of disposable pop that's huge out there that I don't get how it means anything, okay, to someone. And then again, I'm not a 12-year-old girl growing up in, you know, Ohio that's what all her friends are listening to, you know. Certainly, at some point, they're going to hear, you know, crunching A chords from the AC/DC and go like, I like that too. You know, I just always feel that. Or you can't deny when you hear a Led Zeppelin or a catchy Beatles song. Well, they're all catchy to me. I mean, I just always feel that even if they are attracted to disposable pop that I consider, once they really sit down and hear some of the stuff that was from the generation that I really feel shaped, you know, the best stuff of the music world, that they do respond to it, because it's undeniable music. It reaches out and grabs you, and if you didn't hear it the first time, it will shake you by the second time. Writing in KISS actually was a wonderful challenge for me. Wonderful in the sense that I even had the opportunity. Now let's dissect the word challenge, you know, because they compete with each other, Gene and Paul, and I have to use my instinct and my talent to come up with music I like, and then who am I going to pitch it to? Because it almost kind of got to that point where I realized if Paul didn't like it, I can't just give the used idea to Gene and finish it, and vice versa too, which really meant I had to, you know, hedge my bet in the best way that it's going to wind up, you know, you really like it, okay? Gene throws a lot of things against the wall. He's pretty open and likes more things. And Paul, you really got to like really grab his attention with something. Fortunately, there were enough riffs that he liked, and maybe that's going to be a part of a verse, or maybe it's a couple chords in the bridge section, and it would spark him to write something, you know. And by the way, we only would work on things that he felt like, I really like this enough, we're going to finish it. There was very little, you know, like leftover stuff. With Gene, there were others, you know, Gene has probably 5 albums worth of material that didn't make it to a KISS record, you know, and I was a part of some of that, you know, not a lot of it, but I'm just saying that he would continue writing no matter what. And Paul was very driven to just finish what he really feels like, this is going to go on the record, I know it, you know what I mean, and that was a good feeling to go along for the ride. So both of them very different, how they would write, and both of them very different in the sense of what turned them on to want to be in the creative process. The change from digesting an entire body of work, your album, definitely has changed, although I don't believe some of the current artists care about a single at all. You know, even though Muse may have a key track that's a huge hit, that's just a key track, you know. I think the pop artists, being single-based or single-driven by the label, is very, very helpful. That one, you know, appropriate video with that song can generate all these YouTube hits that generate popularity, and then a tour and success and merchandise, and they're a star, you know. And I think because of the speed of that kind of access that people now have, okay, I think that bodes well for a brand new artist that one day they were just, you know, at the grocery store as a clerk, and then all of a sudden now, within maybe a year or two, they could actually be playing some very large venues with adoring fans. So the single thing works that way. Now, back in the era that I grew up in, that could never happen that quickly. But I think that maybe is part of why those become more disposable as compared to that artist that you really see grow, you know. I mean, Bruce Springsteen is still a monster in the business, and, you know, he started out one thing and kept evolving, and those kind of careers, I think it was better when you actually did kind of grow, and you didn't just start out with that one thing that just takes you to the top.
Is artist development kind of dead, so to speak?
Yeah, I don't really think there's such a thing anymore. You know, to get into how the industry has, you know, been able to digest these changes, these massive shifts in how people listen to music, the reluctance of them to buy music, is pretty mind-boggling. I can't even imagine. I mean, grew up in that era where the label was very important, and you want to be friends with that guy, and you want to schmooze the radio guy, and you're very happy when the label president loves you and spends all the money on you, and then of course, if you don't perform, he gets fired, But there was that kind of, they were basically a bank loaning you money that you didn't have to give back to them unless you sold your records. Now the deals are structured different. The instant kind of fame that can happen from a YouTube video, which generates some money, not the same as what albums are capable of. But I can't even imagine how the new model of the industry really completely works. And I'm still very much upset at how people are. I get the streaming music, and I belong to Spotify, and I pay for the subscription, and the same thing for Pandora. But, I still really support owning the thing, you know what I mean? Like when Muse came out with that record, I wanted the CD. I'll probably even buy the vinyl, because that's my mentality of embracing an artist that means something to me. And then someone younger, or they wouldn't even understand why would you do that. They will just watch it on YouTube and enjoy the record that way, which is, to me, just kind of an empty way to be a fan of somebody. Fortunately, people are supporting live music. Thank God. That's really the only, kind of thing that's stayed constant, because concerts have always been popular. People want to be a part. It's there. It's right in front of you. And I'm very, very relieved that that's kind of an important stream of music. I mean, money for me, the live gig. Of course, do I really want to be traveling around when I'm 80? I don't know. But then again, you had some of these blues guys you mentioned. They'll tour till they can't move their body anymore. So the industry is just completely different. It really is. Classic rock for me is always really like my experience growing up listening to the British Invasion, bands like that really changed my world. There's no doubt that started with the Beatles and moved on to The Who, Led Zeppelin, Cream, and on and on and on, okay? And all those bands, there's no mistaking what they sound like and the power of that music and the impact on our current culture. You can't get away from a TV show or a car ad without maybe hearing a Who song, or the Beatles have gotten a little more, looser with their material finally, okay? It's just, there's something about that music that I think really, really will be around forever, equivalent to things like the way that Sinatra and those standards that he's famous for will always be around. So I'm very grateful that I grew up in that generation. The people who may feel that by the 90s a Guns N' Roses is classic, I do think that's almost part of classic rock. I do. I don't think a Soundgarden or Nirvana should be classic rock, really. But I do understand the power of those bands and why they really were at the top of the charts and still mean something now, too. The roots of classic rock was certainly came from, I really do feel like the blues were a very important part of that, because again, my definition being bands like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, all right. There's no doubt that there was something, especially that Led Zeppelin really plugged into. Maybe a little bit too much, if you know what I mean, because there was some definitely riffs that they borrowed, and the way they, presented those riffs and the music that they wrote around that, and the same raw passion was in that, because those blues artists, definitely it was all emotion, but it wasn't sophisticated with the kind of sound that Jimmy Page was able to bring to that band, There's no doubt that the blues was a really integral part of classic rock, even though everybody might have dressed it up a little bit differently. But I think the best example to prove that is like a Led Zeppelin, and the whole scales that are used and the whole approach to the guitar playing is very much, they call it the pentatonic scale, and that's a blues scale, Now, how creative you are with it, what Jeff Beck could do with it will make you cry, okay, because he's just such a monster. But the fact that the majority of the leads from all the bands and all the hits that you know are pretty basically in that mode. And it doesn't make it redundant. It's what you do with it, you know, and how you make it like really. I look at guitar playing as like a singing voice, you know, but singers like Plant and Roger Daltrey, and you know, I don't have to tell you what I think of, you know, Lennon and McCartney singing, and all those bands, the AC/DC guys, you know, they're screaming, but it's all raw passion, and it is to me it does feel like blues, all of it, you know, just wrapped up in a whole different kind of package. With bands like Queen and AC/DC and on, you know, that just seem to be just iconic, you know, besides, of course, Kiss.
Of course.
and that
Have
whole,
you heard of Kiss?
you know, yeah, you know, and I'm actually very proud to be connected to that, you know, and you know, for the past 16 years I've been with Grand Funk Railroad, another band that made a huge impact then, and you know, the crowds we play to are generally very mixed, you know, from the dad who grew up and saw them in 1970 or 75 or something, or at Shea Stadium in '69, and then their you know, children and all, and then I know I'm playing for teenagers or even younger people, and they get it. They don't always connect. Grand Funk is we're an American band or some kind of wonderful, or you know, the hits, but they love that music. And I gotta admit, whenever I'm running around, no matter where I am, I love it when I see a young person with a Led Zeppelin t-shirt, you know, or you're wearing a Ramones shirt, you know, cool. And it's the truth that you know, you can be into the latest, greatest, top, you know, artist right now, but my feeling is I'm not so convinced a lot of those artists we'd be talking about in 10 or 20 years, no less 50 years, you know, the way we've been celebrating now the Beatles and onward, you know, with all the bands that followed. So it's a fertile, incredible cultural, and when I say cultural, they did fashion and politics and all was involved then, because, you know, the world was evolving, you know, and it still is, but music kind of was part of that. And even though I didn't completely buy into the hippie thing, that was going to be real, peace, love, and everybody's going to get along. Just history doesn't really, you know, bode well for that. But the music had a purpose. The music had the passion to change the world and to mean something to people, you know. And I'm not going to say that every Kiss song was quite that way. That was more like have a good time, you know, stand up for yourself and believe in yourself in a sense, and that's something that relates too. And even the grunge bands that were more about how depressed they were, whatever it was, they were expressing themselves and connecting to people. But I still feel like, you know, the hits from that classic rock invasion will be around forever, and it's always going to be a part of our culture. A band from the classic rock generation that I grew up with, you wanted the second album, the third album. If you joined in on the third album, you'll probably, and liked it, you'll buy album number 2, and then you'll go back and dig into album number 1, you know, and maybe support them forever in solo projects from it. You know, David Gilmour's huge. I mean, but it's really because of Pink Floyd, and people are starved for Pink Floyd, so he certainly has that signature Pink Floyd sound. So there you go, David Gilmour, and he deserves it. I mean, he's incredible. But you get what I mean. And sometimes people go solo and it's not quite the same. Even Paul and Gene could never quite sustain what Kiss represents to everybody when they go off on their own. So I don't know. I'm just glad that a lot of the bands that I love are still valid, and I don't feel like I was part of some secret society or something. You know, it's really stood the test of time. I do know the way people share their lives with social media now, being, I'm as guilty as probably the next, being a real big part of their life, although I'm trying to share a bit of my career, you know, so they know what I'm up to, because I do love what I do. I'm very fortunate. But the obsession of everything is very instant, news travels so quickly, you know, that you can't compare that to what it was like. People didn't even know who was playing with Kiss when I did my first tour, because it takes a while for print and things like that to get into people's hands, you know. So when I was on stage, I don't know who they thought I was. It took a while, you know. Now everything's instant. Somebody dies, everybody knows, okay, that day, okay. And I'm not sure how that really affects the fact that we don't see a lot of artists with tremendous passion about what they do, but things are different now, and I'm not really sure why. I remember when Eric Carr first was getting into Metallica, and for me, it was very, you know, frantic double bass drum, crazy a bit, Master of Puppets and earlier stuff, you know, and I was kind of like, I didn't really relate. Then all of a sudden they do an album with, I think it was Mick Rock, you know, and it's like the Black Album. It's just like, wow, this is powerful and amazing. You know, they moved it in a little bit, you know, or we got closer to like an AC/DC, right?
I could just ask you. I know a lot of artists within the metal scene were really thrown off when Metallica did the Black Album, because they kind of strayed away from, you know, the thrash roots. As an artist, do you think there's anything wrong with a musician straying away from what their fans want? They're in it for themselves, not the fans, right? Like, so how do you feel about the relationship from an artist and the fans?
Well, for me, I mean, I really enjoyed it, what they did, because I didn't like the thrash roots. Eric Carr did. Maybe it was the excitement of the drumming, you know, I don't know. I just think that they got broader. They certainly used the right producer, the sounds. You know, to me, when someone makes a left turn just for the money, it's just not going to really be convincing. You know, I think you're going to see right through it. It's not going to feel right. It's not going to be that powerful. Meanwhile, they blew the roof off with that. You know, so they obviously tapped into something that was legitimate for them, even though, could you tell they were a thrash band before that? Probably not. But it worked for them. So that's the good thing about music is when you're sincere with it, it really connects much more with more people. And when you're just kind of like faking it, you know, people are not going to really accept it. It's just not going to, certainly won't stand the test of time. I really hate the labels of hard rock, metal, even classic rock. I relate to all of them, but the best way to answer that question regarding the labels is to look at Kiss, okay? Because I had my 12 years in the band, and there I am, you know, playing some vintage material, and just during the recordings of my years, you know, we're doing a song like Tears Are Falling, which is, I wouldn't call it, I just call it rock or hard rock. And then I would do a solo on a power battle called Forever, okay, you know, where I'm playing an acoustic solo, you know, that Paul wrote with Michael Bolton of all people. And then fast forward to like Revenge, and I'm playing Unholy, okay, what I mean, you know, where Gene's singing demonic kind of things, you know. Kiss, the band's known for Beth, and yet War Machine, okay. So I don't think in any way that Led Zeppelin's catalog is representative of one genre, nor does AC/DC. I will admit that AC/DC tends to be most comfortable in something that you know immediately it's AC/DC. That's to their benefit. The fact that they don't stretch away and you don't hear a power ballad from AC/DC is probably very intentional as to what they love and what they write. I think Zeppelin wanted to always be very, very broad, and so did clearly Kiss, you know. And I don't have to remind you how broad the Beatles were, Who, you know. I don't think there's, you know, I don't get hung up on the labels is what I'm saying. I think it's silly. You either like it, it means something to you, or it doesn't. I always felt like another band that I didn't mention that I do feel is classic rock, even though I guess they started to get popular right when the punk thing was Van Halen. And, you know, here's a guy taking lead guitar and the Guitar Hero and supercharging it like a, you know, a souped up, you know, street racer, you know. And he scared the hell out of me because I'm like, I didn't know what he was doing. Yet I could tell that his diet of guitar music was definitely people that changed my world, like Eric Clapton. So I really feel like Van Halen was another part of that, taking the roots of classic rock. I know Michael Anthony loved Grand Funk. And then you have Eddie talking about Eric Clapton. So you're taking my heroes, you know, and people in those really truly classic rock bands, and then just doing it one step up or something, or taking it to another level that really resonated. There's no doubt. There's always the ante to what's popular, okay? Even if what's popular is good and legitimate, okay? In the sense of punk, I feel like I love that it was guitars. I didn't care for, the fashion statement of piercing every part of your body, okay? But it was still, it was a reaction to, maybe it's the success and the pompous nature of these rock stars with their own jets and 50 people on the crew touring around, which is not where they came from. Maybe that just felt very wrong to some people, and the best way, they're still using the right tool, a guitar, and they're still singing, even if they're screaming, okay? But they kind of really did turn it upside down, stripped it down, and made their own movement. And the fact that they were different, there's the attention, and some of it actually worked. I mean, bands like the Sex Pistols and Clash, they did wind up having radio hits, oddly enough. In the same way that the Beatles eventually shed the suits and then became just completely wore whatever they wanted and made everybody get away from neat and tidy, okay? Now it became, somebody else had to strip it down again. And hence, I think the punk, movement really stripped it down, and everybody got pretty extreme. For me, when I think of classic rock, I'm selfish about it because I feel like I grew up in the best generation of music ever. And I don't necessarily think about the guys that influenced the Beatles. For me, day one was Ed Sullivan, Beatles performing and changing the world of music, okay? And changing my life, okay? Not only did it make me want to play guitar, but, which, thank you God, I was, given some talent towards just innately, but honestly, it starts there for me. And the wealth of bands and songs and the just the social changes that came from it was pretty remarkable to watch. My brothers were older than me, and he had to deal with, when he wanted to grow hair, them being sent to the dean's office. You know what I mean? You couldn't have long hair, anything that resembled the Beatles. In a way, once you get into some of the bands and artists that they would call them alternative in a sense, and then they became really the most popular. The Black Keys are an example. Clearly those guys liked the blues. They stripped it down in another way, and they took off. I was pretty impressed that they could pull that off, be that popular, and still really basically be like a bizarre version of a blues rock band, Of course, the guitars couldn't be too modern or hip looking, everything's got to be kind of just off, and not pompous either, But I don't know if those people will ever, become what you're calling a pocket of classic rock. They probably are very aware of it. The guy in, Trent Reznor from 9 Inch Nails, and that's certainly not classic rock. That band, even though I enjoyed some of their albums very much, he had a little Gene Simmons demon doll on his keyboard where he used to write a lot of the stuff. I mean, these people have to be influenced by somebody, And I think that's the beauty of music, is that everybody, I don't like new artists that try to sound exactly like anybody, Sure, share your influences, but make it your own, to be if you're going to copy Van Halen, there is a Van Halen, don't bother, Take those elements that you love that makes Van Halen so special, but then put your stamp on it and go, hit the ground running, Rival Sons is another new band that clearly they're based in classic rock. I was very impressed when I saw them. And they do it a little different. They're not trying to be any specific, classic rock band, but that's a new band that, is out there, And there are others like that too. The problem that there may not be a household name is the way we now digest music and are exposed to music. I do feel that the record industry has been completely turned upside down to a point of I don't know even how it can figure out really what it's supposed to do. People are getting their music in different ways that didn't fit the old model, which really worked. David Crosby, who I met at one of the rock and roll fantasy camps that I recently did, and I asked the question, what do you think about the music industry that you're asking me? Him being someone at Woodstock, okay, you know? And he's very vocal and very bright, and he was very clear that, you know, the record companies, you know, shot themselves really bad and killed themselves as soon as they put out CDs. Suddenly there's a product that can be replicated, that there's no loss in generation, you know. Yeah, you can, you know, record off of an album and then share that to a friend, but as it goes down the line, it starts to sound like crap. And it's not the same, okay? But as soon as digital music was distributed, and the computer, which helped create digital music, is in everyone's hand, including now their phone. Hence, you see photography places going away because I can take a great picture with my iPhone. Suddenly, how do you protect the money you give that artist? You know, even if it's $100 grand, or a major artist is going to get $1 million, how do you protect that product that they're, you know, how do you make your money back? You can't. And then the rates that the streaming, you know, companies are allowing for the artist, although I do think that some of the industry has their hands in that, but everyone's not really clear about it, if you get what I mean. So they are seeing more money than the artist, but they're not seeing what they used to see because there is no staff, there is very little activity in the sense of what is a record company. I know they've needed to do these 360 deals to survive, but you can't go to a heritage artist, which is another word I call artists that have been around a long time that you know who they are. You know, you can't expect them to give you everything for something unless you're giving them enough money that they never have to think about working again after they did their commitment, you know, the Madonna money, you know what I'm saying? So those 360 deals, which refers to the fact that yeah, they'll, you know, put out your music, but they have their fingers in your merchandise and in your touring, and so in other words, everything that generates money for a band is now part of the business model for the label to be involved with you. That's only going to be for new bands that are struggling, not for the artists that we're talking about. I mean, even I don't need that, and I can survive, you know. So the fact that they even have to go to that is just mind-boggling, you know. And again, until they can figure out, you know, how to make the artists, it's very sad, like songwriters that I knew that were so in demand and everything, because they could really make money having that hit for Heart or that hit for Journey and help co-write a song for one of the Kiss guys, you know. If people aren't, you know, buying the music so that there's money generated for the publisher and so on, you know, how do you expect to get the hot songwriter? Diane Warren, who I oddly had a dream about last night, I have no idea why. You know, she's written, you know, some stuff in my world with Kiss and Michael Bolton and all, you know. She does well still, because there's still writers like that need to be in a movie song, you know, and she's an incredible writer. But the whole model of how everybody is getting their music and paying for their music is so different that the business behind it is just not somewhere where I could predict where it's going or if it's still in a free fall. What I find a lot of the new artists that are popular, they have that producer guy, you know, and that guy's the guy. Let me tell you, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with that. They're talented, that producer guy, but he's got 5 guys that give me some beats, give me some this, give me some that, and that's what they do. And then here you go. You may see their name as a writer, you may not. I don't know. That's up to that producer, if you get what I'm saying. But yeah, all of that is so much different than Steven Tyler and, you know, Joe Perry hashing out a killer new song, you know. So it's different. It really is. And those hit guys, you know, those artists that go to that hit guy, there's a guy that's very famous from Sweden that's a hit guy, and you know, and then there's the guys here in the US, and you know, I don't fault any of those people. They have talent, they seem to be able to put out, you know, a hit product, you know. But it was different. I think it was a little more very important for that kind of organic, where the band guys really define what they're about, and they're less about looking for the outside person. Many of the classic rock bands would use a hit producer, you know, Metallica, Bob Rock, okay, yeah, you know, define their sound, and he's been a part. We had Bob Ezrin, who's worked with, you know, from Pink Floyd to Alice Cooper. But again, that guy's trying to write with the artist and bring in the strongest elements of people that they know. All right. So I just think maybe the artist comes through more, and now that some of the new people, it's really more about the voice for them, you know, that they have that hit voice. I remember a friend of mine turning me on to Muse, and I was kind of like, that's a little Queen, a little Radiohead, a little this, but I really like it, okay? And they became much bigger past the album that I was first turned on to the point where I won't not buy one of their albums, okay? And I heard they put on an incredible live show using all of the elements of a big rock concert, you know. So did the country stars, but, you know. And I feel like a band like Muse really represents the current, you know, kind of scene, because he's brave enough to put that crazy thing on his guitar to make the guitar sound like a synthesizer, yet he plays like a motherfucker, and his music is quite powerful. So only because of a band like Muse, Radiohead before that, even though they were a bit more complex as a band, I don't know if they're going to change the world, okay, but they can sell out arenas. And that means something, because if a band can do that, then you know there's other people who have that desire, okay, and they want to headline, and maybe they'll woodshed enough the way the Beatles did, go to some, you know, sleazy club and play for 2 years together as a band, as opposed to sitting in their bedroom on a, you know, a laptop with Pro Tools, all very like this.
People still believe in the power of rock and roll music.
Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Daniel Sarkisian. I'm an independent filmmaker from Toronto.